She thought changing the name on the deed made it hers. I filed one paper she forgot about. The county assessor's office called me 3 weeks later with a question that would unravel everything. I'm standing in my apartment kitchen holding a tax notice addressed to my grandmother's estate. My grandmother died 8 months ago. The property in question sits 2 hours north in the small town where I grew up. The notice says someone transferred the deed, but never updated the tax records. The county wants to know who's responsible for 3 years of unpaid property tax. My aunt's name is on the new deed. My grandmother never mentioned selling it to her. I set the paper on the counter. My coffee's gone cold. Outside my window, the morning traffic hums steady and indifferent. I pick up my phone and call the county clerk's office. The woman who answers sounds tired. I ask her to pull the deed transfer for the property on Maple Ridge Road. She puts me on hold for 6 minutes. When she comes back, she says the deed was filed 14 months ago, 2 months before my grandmother died. The notary signature looks legitimate. The witness signatures belong to my aunt's husband and her daughter. I ask if my grandmother's signature was verified. She says the notary is responsible for that. I ask for a copy of the transfer document. She says it'll be ready by end of week. I hang up and stare at the tax notice again. My grandmother raised me after my mother left when I was 9. She worked as a school librarian for 30 years. She saved every penny. That house on Maple Ridge was hers free and clear. She always told me it would be mine someday, not in a formal will, just in the way grandmothers promise things over Sunday dinners and holiday visits. My Aunt Patricia is my mother's older sister. She moved to Arizona 15 years ago after her second divorce. She visited maybe twice a year. She called on birthdays. When my grandmother got sick last year, Patricia showed up more often. At the time, I thought she was being supportive. I was 32 and working 60-hour weeks at a commercial real estate firm downtown. I visited every weekend. I helped with the medical appointments and the prescriptions and the grocery runs. Patricia stayed for a week here and there. She'd make a big show of cooking dinner and posting photos on Facebook about family and sacrifice. My grandmother died in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in February. Patricia organized the funeral. She paid for the flowers. She stood at the front of the chapel and cried harder than anyone. After the service, she hugged me and said we'd go through the house together when I was ready. I said I needed a few weeks. She said take all the time I needed. I should have gone sooner. The deed transfer copy arrives by mail on a Thursday. I open it at my desk during lunch. The signature that's supposed to be my grandmother's looks close, but the G in her first name slants wrong. My grandmother had beautiful cursive. 60 years of writing library cards and thank you notes gave her a distinctive hand. This G is shaky. The loop is too wide. I pull up old birthday cards she sent me. I compare the signatures. They don't match. I take a photo of both and text my friend Rachel, who works in forensic accounting. She calls me back in 20 minutes. She says I need a handwriting expert and probably a lawyer. She says if the deed is fraudulent, the title is invalid. She also says I need to be careful. Accusing family of forgery is serious. I tell her I know. That weekend, I drive up to the house. It's mid-April and the dogwoods are blooming along the highway. The house sits at the end of a gravel driveway surrounded by oak trees. It's a small 2-bedroom cottage with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. My grandmother planted hydrangeas along the front walk. They're starting to bud. The lockbox on the front door is gone. I try my key. It doesn't fit. The locks have been changed. I walk around to the back. Through the kitchen window, I see the table is gone. The curtains are different. Someone's painted the walls. I call Patricia. She doesn't answer. I call again. Voicemail. I text her asking why the locks are changed and why she's remodeling. She texts back 3 hours later. House is mine now. Grandma signed it over before she passed, going to rent it out. You can visit sometime if you want. I sit in my car in that gravel driveway for an hour. The sun sets behind the trees. The porch light doesn't come on because someone's disconnected it or changed the timer. I think about every Sunday dinner, every Christmas morning, every summer afternoon I spent reading on that porch. I think about my grandmother's handwriting. I drive home and spend the weekend researching property fraud. I learn that if a deed transfer is procured through forgery or undue influence, it's voidable. I learn that property tax liability follows the legal owner. I learn that if someone fraudulently transfers property, they can be held liable for any tax consequences. The tax notice said 3 years of unpaid property tax. The county assessed penalties and interest. The total is nearly $18,000. I call the county assessor Monday morning. I ask who's responsible for paying the back taxes now that the deed's been transferred. He says the current deed holder is responsible. I ask if he's contacted Patricia. He says they sent notices to the property address but got no response. I ask what happens if she doesn't pay. He says they'll place a lien on the property. I thank him and hang up. Then I call a lawyer. Her name is Margaret Voss. She's in her 50s with gray hair and a reputation for handling estate disputes. Her office is downtown in a brick building with tall windows. I meet her on a Wednesday afternoon. I bring the tax notice, the deed transfer copy, the birthday cards with my grandmother's signature. Margaret examines everything for 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, she looks up at me. "This signature is inconsistent with the exemplars," she says. "I'll need a certified handwriting analyst, but I'd bet money this is forged." I ask what we can do. She says we file a quiet title action to challenge the deed. We also file a correction with the county showing the transfer is disputed. That means Patricia becomes responsible for the tax liability during the dispute period. If she doesn't pay, the county places a lien. The lien complicates any attempt to sell or refinance. It also triggers an automatic investigation by the county fraud office. I ask how long it takes. She says 3 to 6 months if Patricia doesn't fight, longer if she does. I ask about costs. She quotes me a retainer that makes my stomach drop. I have savings, but not much. I've been putting money aside for a down payment on my own place. Margaret sees my face. She says she can work on contingency if we prove fraud. If we recover the property, we petition for attorney's fees from Patricia. I sign the retainer that afternoon. Margaret files the quiet title action on Friday. She also files a correction notice with the county clerk marking the deed transfer as disputed pending judicial review. The county assessor's office receives the correction on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Patricia gets a certified letter informing her that, as the current deed holder of record, she's now responsible for the outstanding property tax bill of $18,412. Plus penalties. Plus interest accruing daily. Patricia calls me Wednesday night. I'm at home making dinner. She's screaming before I even say hello. "What the hell did you do?" she yells. "I just got a letter saying I owe $18,000 in property tax." I tell her she's listed as the property owner. "You filed something. The county said you disputed the deed." I tell her the signature on the deed doesn't match Grandma's handwriting. I tell her I'm challenging the transfer. She goes quiet for 5 seconds. "You ungrateful little bitch," she says. "Your grandmother gave me that house. She wanted me to have it. You were too busy with your fancy job to care about her." I tell her Grandma promised it to me. "Promises don't mean anything," Patricia says. "The deed is legal. You're wasting your time and money." I ask her why she never told me about the transfer. She hangs up. I sit on my couch staring at my phone. My hands are shaking. I feel sick. I also feel something else. A small, cold anger that sits in my chest like a stone. The next morning, I go back to Margaret's office. I tell her about the phone call. She takes notes. She says Patricia's reaction is consistent with someone who knows they've done something wrong. She says we need to gather more evidence. Medical records showing my grandmother's mental state in the months before the transfer. Financial records showing any unusual transactions. Testimony from people who knew my grandmother's intentions. I spend 2 weeks collecting everything I can find. My grandmother's primary care physician provides a letter stating she was of sound mind and had no cognitive impairment up until 2 weeks before her death. The letter is dated and stamped. It says, "Patient demonstrated full decision-making capacity during all appointments in the 12 months preceding her death." I get statements from 3 of my grandmother's friends. All of them say she intended the property to go to me. One of them remembers my grandmother specifically saying, "That house is for Emily when I'm gone," at a book club meeting 8 months before she died. I find my grandmother's bank records. There's a withdrawal of $5,000 2 weeks before the deed transfer date. The memo line says legal fees. I call the bank and request transaction details. The check was made out to a law office in Phoenix. Patricia's city. Margaret files a motion to compel discovery. She requests all documents related to the deed transfer, including any payments made to attorneys or notaries. Patricia's lawyer responds with a motion to dismiss, claiming, "I have no standing to challenge the deed." We go before a judge in early June. The courtroom is small and wood-paneled. The judge is a woman in her 60s named Hendricks. She listens to both sides for 40 minutes. Patricia's lawyer argues the deed is valid and recorded. He says family disputes over promised inheritances aren't grounds for legal action. Margaret presents the handwriting analysis, the medical records, the witness statements, the suspicious bank withdrawal. Judge Hendricks asks Patricia's lawyer to explain the $5,000 payment to a Phoenix law office. He says he's unaware of any such payment. The judge orders Patricia to produce all records related to the deed transfer within 30 days. She denies the motion to dismiss. She sets a hearing date for late July. Patricia's lawyer looks unhappy. I feel my chest unclench for the first time in weeks. Outside the courthouse, Margaret tells me this is a good sign. She says judges don't order discovery unless they see merit in the claim. She says we need to be ready for Patricia to escalate. And she's right. 2 weeks later, I get a Facebook message from my cousin Stephanie, Patricia's daughter. "We haven't spoken in years." The message is short. "You're tearing this family apart over a house. Grow up." I don't respond. Then the voicemails start. Patricia's husband calls me twice. He says I'm being selfish. He says my grandmother would be ashamed of me. My aunt's friends start leaving comments on my old Facebook photos. Things like money hungry and disrespectful. I make my profile private. Rachel tells me to save everything. Screenshots, voicemails, text messages. She says if this goes to trial, it shows a pattern of harassment. I save it all in a folder on my laptop. The discovery deadline comes. Patricia's lawyer produces a file. Margaret reviews it and calls me into her office the next day. There's a notarized statement from the attorney who allegedly prepared the deed, she says. He claims your grandmother came to his office and requested the transfer. I ask if the statement seems credible. Margaret slides a paper across the desk. The attorney's office is in Phoenix. Your grandmother was in hospice care the week of the alleged meeting. According to her medical records, she couldn't walk without assistance. I stare at the document. He's lying, I say. Yes, Margaret says, and we can prove it. She files a motion for sanctions against Patricia's attorney for submitting a false declaration. She attaches my grandmother's hospice intake records showing she was admitted 4 days before the alleged meeting in Phoenix. She attaches a sworn statement from the hospice director confirming my grandmother never left the facility during her stay. The motion lands like a bomb. Patricia's attorney withdraws from the case 2 days later. Patricia has to find new representation. The hearing gets pushed to September. Margaret says this is a sign they know they're losing. She says they'll probably try to settle. She's wrong. In late August, I get a call from an unknown number. I answer and hear my aunt's voice. She sounds different, calm, almost sweet. Emily, she says, I think we should talk, just the two of us, family. I tell her to talk to my lawyer. This has gone too far, she says. I don't want to fight anymore. Let's just work this out. You drop the lawsuit and I'll give you some money from the sale of the house. Fair is fair. I ask her how much. 20,000, she says. Enough for a nice vacation, you can move on. The house is worth 300,000. I tell her no. You're making a mistake, Patricia says. Her voice changes, gets harder. You're going to lose and then you'll have nothing. Your grandmother wanted me to have that house. The deed is legal. You're just jealous because she loved me more. I hang up without responding. Margaret calls me an hour later. She says Patricia's new lawyer contacted her with a settlement offer, $20,000 in exchange for dropping the suit. Margaret says it's insulting. I tell her I already turned it down. Good, she says, we go to trial. The hearing is scheduled for September 23rd. Margaret spends 2 weeks prepping me. We review the timeline, the evidence, the witness statements. She brings in the handwriting expert to explain his analysis. He's a retired FBI examiner named Carver. He shows me microscopic differences in the pressure patterns and letter formations. This signature was traced, he says, likely from a scan or photocopy. The person who did it tried to match the shape but couldn't replicate the natural flow. I ask how certain he is. I'd testify to it under oath, he says. The night before the hearing, I can't sleep. I lie in bed watching the ceiling fan turn slow circles. I think about my grandmother's hands, the way she'd fold them in her lap when she told stories, the way she'd touch my shoulder when I was upset. I think about Patricia standing at the funeral crying. I wonder if any of it was real. The courthouse smells like floor wax and old paper. Margaret meets me outside the courtroom at 8:30. She's wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. She looks calm. Remember, she says, answer the questions, don't volunteer extra information, don't let them make you angry. I nod. We go inside. Judge Hendricks takes the bench at 9. Patricia sits at the other table with her new lawyer. He's young and nervous looking. Patricia won't look at me. The hearing lasts 4 hours. Margaret presents the handwriting analysis first. Carver takes the stand and walks through his examination. He projects enlarged images of the signatures. He points out the inconsistencies. He says, in his professional opinion, the signature on the deed transfer is a forgery. Patricia's lawyer tries to challenge his credentials. Judge Hendricks shuts it down. She says Carver's background speaks for itself. Next, Margaret presents the medical records. The hospice director testifies via video. She confirms my grandmother was in her care during the time of the alleged Phoenix meeting. She says my grandmother was lucid but physically weak. She says there's no record of her leaving the facility. Patricia's lawyer has no questions. Then Margaret calls me to the stand. I swear in and sit down. My mouth is dry. Margaret asks me about my relationship with my grandmother. I tell her about the weekends, the dinners, the promises. I tell her my grandmother said the house would be mine someday. Patricia's lawyer objects, says it's hearsay. Judge Hendricks overrules, says it goes to the decedent's intent. Margaret asks if my grandmother ever mentioned giving the property to Patricia. I say no. She asks if I was surprised to learn about the transfer. I say yes. She asks why I challenged it. Because the signature didn't look right, I say, and because my grandmother wouldn't have done that without telling me. Patricia's lawyer cross-examines me. He asks if I have any proof my grandmother promised me the house. I say I have witness statements. He asks if there's anything in writing. I say no. He suggests maybe my grandmother changed her mind. I look him in the eye. She was in hospice. She couldn't have traveled to Phoenix. The signature is forged. You know it and I know it. Judge Hendricks tells me to just answer the questions. But I see her write something in her notes. Margaret rests our case at noon. We break for lunch. I eat a sandwich in the hallway outside the courtroom. Margaret checks her phone and tells me it's going well. She says Patricia's lawyer hasn't presented any credible defense. When we reconvene, Patricia's lawyer calls one witness, the notary who allegedly witnessed the signature. He's a man in his 40s who owns a shipping store. He testifies he notarized the deed at his location. He says my grandmother came in with Patricia and signed the document in front of him. Margaret asks him what day. He checks his records, January 19th. Margaret pulls out the hospice admission record, January 15th. She asks the notary if he's certain about the date. He hesitates, says his records show January 19th. She asks if he verified my grandmother's identity. He says yes. She asks what identification he used. He says he doesn't remember specifically, maybe a driver's license. Margaret produces my grandmother's DMV record. Her license expired in November, 2 months before the alleged notarization. The notary goes pale. Margaret asks if he actually saw my grandmother sign the document. He says he did. She asks if she was alone with the document at any time. He says no. She asks if Patricia was in the room. He says yes. Margaret lets that sit for a moment. No further questions, she says. Judge Hendricks looks at Patricia's lawyer. Anything else? He says no. She calls a 15-minute recess. When she comes back, she doesn't sit down. She stands at the bench and looks at both tables. I've heard enough, she says. The evidence presented by the plaintiff is compelling and largely unrebutted. The signature analysis strongly suggests forgery. The medical records directly contradict the alleged timeline of events. The notary's testimony is inconsistent with the documented facts. She looks at Patricia. Ms. Hartwell, the deed transfer dated January 19th is invalid. This court finds by clear and convincing evidence that the signature attributed to Mrs. Catherine Hayes was not genuine and that the transfer was procured through fraudulent means. Patricia stands up. This is insane. That house is mine. She gave it to me. Judge Hendricks bangs her gavel. Sit down, Ms. Hartwell. Patricia doesn't sit. You don't know anything. You don't know what she wanted. Her lawyer pulls her arm. She shakes him off. My mother was sick and confused, and Emily convinced her to leave everything to her. I was protecting my mother's real wishes. The courtroom goes silent. Margaret's face stays neutral, but I see her hand move to her phone under the table. Judge Hendricks leans forward. Ms. Hartwell, are you admitting you knowingly filed a false deed? Patricia seems to realize what she said. Her face goes white. She sits down hard. The judge looks at Margaret. Counselor. Your Honor, I request the court reporter read back the witness's statement. The reporter does. Patricia's words hang in the air. Judge Hendricks makes another note. The court finds that the deed transfer is void ab initio. Title to the property located at 847 Maple Ridge Road is hereby restored to the estate of Catherine Hayes. The plaintiff is recognized as the sole heir and beneficiary. Additionally, I'm ordering restitution in the amount of $18,412, representing the unpaid property taxes that Ms. Hartwell became liable for during her fraudulent holding of the title. She pauses. I'm also referring this matter to the county district attorney for investigation of possible forgery and filing of false documents. This hearing is concluded. The gavel comes down. Patricia stands up so fast her chair falls over. She's screaming now, real screaming. Her lawyer tries to calm her down. She pushes past him and heads toward me. A bailiff steps between us. You ruined everything, Patricia screams. That house was mine. You took it from me. You're just like your mother, a selfish little. The bailiff escorts her out. Her voice echoes down the hallway. Margaret touches my arm. Let's go. We walk out a side exit. I'm shaking. Margaret guides me to a bench in the empty corridor. She sits next to me and waits. Did that really happen? I ask. Yes, she says, and someone filmed it. She shows me her phone. A court observer posted a video to TikTok. Patricia's meltdown, her admission, the judge's ruling. It already has 50,000 views. By that evening, it has 500,000. The video goes viral overnight. Legal commentary accounts pick it up. Aunt's courtroom confession backfires, reads one headline. The comments are brutal. People share stories about their own family disputes, about estate theft, about elderly relatives taken advantage of. Someone identifies Patricia by name and finds her Facebook page. She deactivates it within hours. The local news picks up the story. A reporter calls me asking for comment. I decline. Margaret handles all media inquiries. She releases a brief statement saying we're pleased with the court's decision and the matter is now with the DA. The DA's office opens an investigation the following week. A detective calls and asks if I'll come in for an interview. I spend 2 hours at the county building going through everything. The detective is a woman named Tors. She's thorough and patient. She says they're building a case for felony forgery and attempted theft by deception. I ask how long it takes. She says 3 to 6 months. In early October, I receive formal notification that the property title has been transferred back to my grandmother's estate. Margaret files the final paperwork to transfer it to me as sole heir. By the end of the month, the house legally belongs to me. I drive up on a Saturday morning. It's cool and the leaves are starting to turn. I use my new key in the new lock. The house is exactly as I left it, or as I remember it. The walls are still painted wrong. The furniture is still gone. I spend the day there anyway. I sit on the porch and watch the light move through the trees. I walk through the rooms and remember where things used to be. The kitchen table under the window, the bookshelf in the hallway, my grandmother's chair by the fireplace. I cry for the first time since the hearing. Not because I'm sad, because I'm tired, and because I won. The criminal case against Patricia moves slowly. Margaret refers me to a criminal attorney who helps me prepare a victim impact statement. In December, the DA offers Patricia a plea deal. Felony forgery reduced to misdemeanor fraud with restitution and probation. Patricia refuses. She wants to go to trial. Her new lawyer tries to argue she believed she had a right to the property, that my grandmother had verbally promised it to her. The prosecutor presents the forged signature, the fabricated notary statement, Patricia's own courtroom admission. The trial lasts 3 days. The jury deliberates for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing in February, the judge gives her 18 months with eligibility for work release after 6 months. She's also ordered to pay full restitution for the property taxes, court costs, and my legal fees. The total is over $60,000. She has to sell her house in Phoenix to pay it. I attend the sentencing hearing, but I don't speak. I submit my written statement and let it stand. In it, I write about my grandmother's hands, her promises, the Sunday dinners. I write about discovering the forgery and feeling the ground drop out. I write about fighting for something that was rightfully mine and learning that justice is slow and expensive and sometimes cruel. I don't write about Patricia. I don't call her a thief or a liar. I don't have to. The facts do that for me. After the sentencing, reporters want to interview me. A local TV station reaches out. A podcast about family crimes asks if I'll appear as a guest. I decline everything. Margaret advises that silence is often the most powerful response. I take her advice. Instead, I focus on the house. I spend March and April renovating. I repaint the walls the original cream color. I replace the porch boards. I plant new hydrangeas where the old ones died. I bring back my grandmother's furniture from storage. The kitchen table, the bookshelf, the chair by the fireplace. In May, I host a small gathering. My grandmother's friends from book club, neighbors from the old days, the hospice director. We drink tea on the porch and share stories. Someone brings a photo album. We look through pictures of my grandmother from decades ago. Young and smiling, middle-aged and proud, old and content. One of the women touches my hand. She'd be so proud of you, she says. I believe her. That summer, I make a decision. The house is too big for me and too far from work. I don't want to rent it out. I don't want to sell it. Instead, I contact a local nonprofit that provides temporary housing for women leaving domestic violence situations. I offer to donate the use of the house for 5 years with an option to extend. They accept immediately. The house becomes a safe space for 3 women and their children at a time. The nonprofit handles maintenance and management. I visit once a month. Sometimes I meet the residents. Sometimes I just check on the hydrangeas. In the first year, the house provides shelter for 7 women and 12 children. My grandmother would have loved that. The legal fees and stress take a toll. I lose weight. I sleep poorly for months, but something shifts inside me. I learn that I'm capable of fighting for what's right even when it's hard, even when it costs money I don't have, even when family turns cruel. I learn that justice is possible, but not guaranteed. I learned that sometimes you have to file the paper everyone else ignores. Patricia serves 9 months before getting early release for good behavior. She moves back to Arizona. She's blocked on all my accounts. I've never heard from her directly again. Stephanie sends me a Facebook message last Christmas, just a sentence. I'm sorry for what my mom did. I don't respond, some apologies are too late. I still work at the real estate firm. I got promoted to senior analyst last spring. My boss says I have good instincts for title issues. I smile and don't explain why. On Sunday mornings, I drive up to the house and sit on the porch. Sometimes there are kids playing in the yard. Sometimes a woman is reading on the steps. I don't intrude. I just watch for a little while and then leave. Last month, I got a letter from one of the residents. She wrote about how the house gave her and her daughter a place to heal after leaving a dangerous situation. She wrote about feeling safe for the first time in years. She wrote that she didn't know me, but she wanted to say thank you. I keep that letter in my desk drawer at work. On hard days, I read it. Would you have fought for that house? What would you have done if you discovered your family member forged a deed? I think about those questions sometimes. I don't have easy answers. Fighting cost me relationships, it cost me money, it cost me months of stress and fear and doubt, but it also gave me something back, not just the house, not just justice. It gave me the certainty that, when something matters, you don't look away. You file the paper. You show up to court. You tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Last week I drove by the house and saw new flowers planted along the front walk. Someone put up a bird feeder. The porch light was on even though it was afternoon. Signs of life, signs of care. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about every Sunday dinner and every promise. I thought about her handwriting, the real handwriting, the beautiful cursive that 60 years of love and work had created. No one can forge that. No one can take it away. I put the car in reverse and headed home. The sun was setting behind the trees. The dogwoods were blooming again. Everything looked exactly as it should. If you're dealing with estate fraud or suspicious property transfers, document everything. Get legal help early. Don't assume family will do the right thing just because they're family. And remember, sometimes the paper everyone ignores is the one that changes everything. Thank you for listening to my story.